Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're back with our $315 self-built budget PC, and I wanted to go over things in a more concise way. So in case you missed it, we had a 2-hour live stream where I built this thing and got it working and played a few games on it and whatnot. In this video, we're going to be much more concise and kind of run through things like I would do a typical review. I'll probably do 1 or 2 other videos after this one talking about multimedia and some other things. Because in this one, I really want to focus on performance, especially as it relates to how a comparable Intel machine for around the same money might perform. Now, what's interesting about this computer is that we built it with an AMD processor called an APU, and that provides both the CPU and a GPU on a single chip, which is what powers this computer. And that's not unusual in 2016. In fact, many Intel computers are also configured the same way. It's brought down the cost of PCs tremendously because you can do more with less components, but this performs a little bit better on graphics. Actually, in some cases, a lot better with graphics than the Intel chips do. And that is why, if you want to buy a very cheap gaming computer, building your own with the parts that I've built with here might be something worth considering. Now, what I want to do is, before we get into the review portion here, is recap from our live stream and do a little flashback, if you will, one of those things, and look at what components went into this computer. Then we'll come back and cover a few things that I didn't mention there. So let me go through the parts here and just show you what we've got here. Again, these were provided to the show free of charge, at least many of them were. However, nobody is paying for this review, and all the opinions you're about to hear are my own, and nobody is reviewing this content before it is posted, mainly because I am shooting this live right now. So let's go through the parts list here, and we'll begin with the motherboard, and I'll go through the price of everything also as I do it here. So what we've got here is a motherboard from ASRock. This is the let me get the right orientation here, A88M-G3.1, and AMD actually sent this to the show for us to build this computer with. This motherboard on Amazon at the moment will go for about $71, and you might be able to find less expensive motherboards here to do the same kind of thing. So what you're seeing here is what I put together. By the way, you can go to Lon.TV/budget parts and get a part list. So that is the motherboard. The case is rather large here, so I'm going to go back out to my big screen here. This is a what is this? This is a, let's see, case is a Rosewill R363 MBK. This was about $50. I'll try to get a better shot of it, maybe on one of my other cameras here. And this one looks pretty nice from the front here. Let me get the front angled around here. So very shiny, actually. This was $50 with a 400-watt power supply. I wanted to kind of get something that was a little bit more name brand than not. So that is what we went with here. So that is the case that we're using. Again, $50 for that. You can see that part list link there, so you can kind of get a feel for all of that. Now we'll get into some other stuff. We probably want to know what kind of CPU we're going to put in. So almost lost my screwdriver there. So the folks from AMD sent over their processor, of course, and this is, let me get it into the camera here. This is an AMD A10-7800. This is an older CPU, but they call these an APU, and they have apparently a faster GPU built into them. So the graphics processor that's on this chip is apparently faster than a comparable one you might get from Intel. So that is why we're testing this out. We haven't done a lot with AMD here on the channel. I felt bad about that. I ran into some AMD folks at PAX East, and they were very eager to have us put something together. So again, the computer we're building here today, you can put together for about $315. And once we get all the parts put together, we'll see how all of that works. So the processor, along with the fan and heatsink, will cost you about $114 on Amazon. So again, everything we're putting together here is very inexpensive. So now we got to get into some RAM. So you can't build the computer without a CPU, a motherboard, and some memory. So the folks from PNY sent over a couple of these monsters for us to use here. This is DDR3 RAM. This is their Anarchy RAM. It's got a nice big heatsink on it too. This is a 16 gigabyte kit. This will cost about $60. And if you're doing the math, you'll know that we're kind of running over the $315 budget. But you can get an 8 gigabyte kit for less than that. I think you can get that from Amazon. Let's see, what's the price on that? $40. So you can get 16 gigs for what you're seeing here for about $60, or pay $40 and get 8 gigabytes of RAM. You definitely want to get them in pairs because this is a dual channel memory motherboard. So you'll get better performance by installing this in pairs. What we're going to do is put 2 sticks of 8 in here to get 16. But again, you can put 8 gigabytes in and spend a little bit less money. So that is what we have there. The CPU that you'll buy at retail will have a fan and heat sink, but AMD sent along this one for us too. So we've got that over there. And then we've got an SSD here. This is the PNY CS1311 SSD. Now this is only 120 gigabytes, so if you want an SSD, you're not going to get as much space for a low price, but I was very surprised to see what this little thing cost, and this one's only $40. So you can get an SSD for 40 bucks, get a nice zippy performance here on your computer. All right, so that is what we've got inside of this machine. You saw how we got to that $315 price tag. I should note that that price does not include an operating system, so you do need to go out and get Windows. You can get Windows and use it for maybe about a month or so before Microsoft starts, kind of badgering you for activation. You can go and run the Microsoft Media Creation tool directly off their website, put it on a USB stick, and you are ready to go with that. Alternatively, you can also put Steam OS on here, which is Valve's operating system. That's a Unix-based operating system that doesn't have the full Steam library, but it does have a lot of games, including Valve's games. I did get that up and running on here earlier. It does work, and if you're interested in seeing more with Steam OS on here, we can maybe do another video on it. Doesn't perform as well as it does in Windows, but I think it might be passable for a lot of folks. Now, what I wanted to do before we got into booting the machine up here is just show you what kind of ports the ASRock motherboard has, because I didn't cover that during the live stream. So you've got two USB 2.0 ports back here. You have a USB 3.1 port along with a Type-C port at 3.1 speeds. And two more USB 3.1 ports over here. And you've got HDMI, VGA, DVI, a PS2 keyboard and mouse slot here as well, gigabit Ethernet, as well as audio, including optical out. So a very complete motherboard for the price. And AMD really picked a good one to send to us for doing all the performance here. So now what I'm going to do is get this thing off the desk, get our monitor hooked up, and we're going to boot this up and start playing around with a few games. And you can see really some of the nice things you can do for very little money, because I found a little BIOS tweak that gave us a tremendous performance boost over what we saw last night. Now, I want to begin before we go into Windows by going into the system BIOS on the motherboard, and I want to point out the memory we have installed here, because a lot of you noticed this on the live stream. So we have those two PNY memory sticks, and they're rated here at DDR3 2400, and 2400 refers to the clock speed that the RAM can run at. So it can run at essentially 2.4 gigahertz, and when I installed that RAM in the computer here, the motherboard didn't let it run at the full rated speed. It was running it much slower. I think it was running around 1600 megahertz or so. So what I did is I went over to the overclocking tweaker setting here, and this is something you'll find on most motherboards these days. And what I looked for was the DRAM frequency, and I changed it to 2400, and that forced it to basically run at the speed it was designed to run at. And the performance increases were significant. In fact, about 36% faster on the 3D Mark CloudGate test on that setting versus what it was running at the night of the live stream. So let's take a look at the score here. We got a score of 7,054, 50 frames per second on both the graphical tests, 9.39 frames per second on the CPU intensive physics test. Now, I want you to take a look at the Microsoft Surface Book on this grid. That one got a pretty much the same score on the graphics test with its own NVIDIA GPU. So this gives you an idea as to how fast the graphic hardware is on this little one-chip device. Pretty remarkable, actually, all things considered. Now, the Surface Book does better on its overall score because its CPU is faster, so that's why this overall score was better, but graphically, it's about the same with this single-chip device. Pretty remarkable. I also ran this test on a Dell XPS 15, which has a Skylake i7 processor built in from Intel. Very fast, high-end quad-core chip. What I did is I disabled the NVIDIA GPU on that laptop and ran the test, and we got a score there of 7,903. But look at the graphic performance here. Almost 20 frames per second faster running off this AMD APU than we got running off the graphical system built into that Intel i7 processor. So graphically, the APU is much, much faster, although when it comes to CPU performance, that i7, of course, is toasting it, but that's to be expected given the fact that the i7 is a much, much faster processor and much more expensive when it comes to CPU performance. But graphically, the embedded graphics system on this APU is really fast and competitive with what you might get out of a low-end discrete GPU. So I think if you're looking for a cheap gaming PC, this is probably the way to go, because you'll get a really good bang for the buck, actually, without having to buy too much more hardware, which I found to be pretty remarkable. One more thing I wanted to show you here on the BIOS setting was in the Northbridge configuration. I did up the video share memory from 1 gigabyte to 2 gigabytes, and some games like to have a little bit more video memory available to them, so I upped that. Now, it takes that memory away from what you installed. So I have 16 gigabytes installed. I have 2 gigabytes now dedicated to graphics, which means Windows gets about 14 gigabytes or so available to it for programs to run in. So you do lose the RAM for your programs, but you give it dedication basically to the graphics side of the equation there. So you do have to kind of figure out what your individual needs are, maybe how much RAM you might need initially when you get the computer up and running. But those are the two BIOS settings that I did change. And normally I don't change them a lot just because I like having a stable system versus one that can run as fast as possible. So we still have very good stability here because that RAM is designed to run at that speed. So now that we got that out of the way, let's boot up our Windows installation here and see how some of these games run, because they are running much better now with that new setting, and we're able to get some really decent frame rates out of some popular games at 1080 too. Let's take a look. All right, so we've got Grand Theft Auto 5 here running at 1080p, 1920 by 1080. You may not be able to see the frame rate indicator in the upper left-hand corner, but we are getting around 30 frames per second. It will occasionally drop down into the high 20s, so I'll see it sometimes go around 25 or so, but generally it's keeping itself closer to 30 than it is to 20, so very playable. It's not going to be 60 frames per second, but again, we're not running with a discrete GPU here either. This is a $315 machine out of the box, and it is working pretty darn good, especially since we made that setting adjustment on the BIOS. And I did want to show you the graphics settings here so you can see what you're going to give up perhaps as far as image quality is concerned. I also want to point out that we did add that 2 gigabytes of available video memory, and the way we have GTA 5 configured right now, we've got about 1.2 gigabytes in use, so having that extra bump in video memory assignment will help you out a little bit here. But you can see we've got the 1920 by 1080 resolution. I turned on the FXAA for anti-aliasing, but I found the MSAA was too slow, so you're not going to be able to get that going there. You can see here we've got the population density, the variety, and the distance scaling turned up pretty high, and you can see the rest of the settings over here for some of the other image qualities things there. I did find when I started adjusting the image quality to make it look better, that's when it really started to bog down. But I think if we really wanted to, we could probably get this working pretty nicely at 720p, maybe get close to 60 frames per second. I was getting it with these same settings around 50 or so, 45 or 50 at 720p, so I think you could probably get there if you really reduce some additional image quality to get a little bit more of a frame rate squeaked out of it. But I'm really impressed that we're seeing this, again, out of a single chip device. Let's take a look at some more games. Now, another game we struggled to run at 1080p during the live stream at a decent frame rate was Rocket League, and here we're getting around the same frame rate we saw with GTA 5. So I'm in the 30 frames per second territory. Sometimes it drops down into the high 20s again, but much, much more playable with those settings adjusted for the memory than it was before, and really, again, another great experience you'll have here with this low-cost gaming PC. Let me pull up the graphics settings here so you can get a feel for this as well. And actually, I have everything turned up pretty high right now, so I think if we went down to 720p or maybe even just turned off some of this stuff here, we might actually get a better frame rate on the 1080p mode. But I found this to be very playable at 30 frames per second, considering the cost here. So pretty good experience on Rocket League. Another game that ran pretty well on here was Counterstrike GO. We've got it running now with the new settings, and here we're seeing frame rates in the 40 to 45 frames per second territory, almost to 50 sometimes. So a significant boost here as well. And I think for Counter-Strike players, this is a pretty good platform, again, for a budget PC to be able to play your favorite game without having too many hiccups at 1080p. And what video of mine would be complete without a little Minecraft? And we've got it running here at a much faster frame rate than we had before during the live stream as well. So we're seeing frame rates well above 100 frames per second. Really nice Minecraft experience for those of you looking for one. And this is running with the Optifine performance enhancing plugin, so we're getting a little bit better performance there. But as I'm playing this, and this is something we look at all the time when we review PCs, I'm thinking about spending $400 on that Dell Braswell powered device we looked at a couple of weeks ago. or spending less on this and getting significantly better performance in games like Minecraft, as well as the other stuff that we looked at that other machine can't even run. So really, I think if you're looking for a very inexpensive gaming device, this one may be the direction you'll want to take. And what's nice is that, for what you would spend on a gaming console, you get a computer. And we're going to take a look now at some web browsing and a few things that you might just do for computing tasks and see how it stacks up against some other computers that cost more. All right, let's take a look at my YouTube channel first, and we'll load up a 1080p 60 video file with the Edge browser and see how it performs there. I'll make it a little bit larger and just get a sense for it. So I haven't really seen any big issues. It performs about where I've seen other low-cost PCs perform, so we're getting good video playback here. I think it'll be fine for Netflix and all the other streaming services you might look at. One thing I did notice was a little bit of flakiness with the 4K video playback, and typically on the Edge browser we don't have problems like you're seeing here with the video all kind of messed up. It does improve itself after a second and get working again. I did notice a few more drop frames on here than I've seen on some of the low-cost Intel devices. So the 4K playback isn't as good on Edge. It does a little bit better on Chrome, but still not great. So that was the only area that I noticed a little bit of a performance difference between what the AMD APU can do versus what some of the Intel CPUs can do. But web browsing's fine on here. It kind of lines up with where I've seen a lot of the Core M devices perform as far as web browsing is concerned. And on the Octane benchmark test, we get a score of 20,039, which is pretty good. It puts it a little bit below where the current Skylake i3 processors are, and cost-wise, the Skylake i3s, which are dual-core chips, will cost about the same as this one does. They'll do a little bit better on web browsing, primarily because they are a little bit faster in the CPU department, but these are much faster in the graphics department, and that is really kind of the differentiator here between the APUs from AMD and some of the Skylake CPUs that you'll get from Intel for around the same price. So this is really graphically oriented, really kind of geared towards gamers looking for a value device, which is what we've put together here, and I've been really impressed with this. And what's really nice especially is some of the games that are not all that demanding you can run on here and get that indie game experience that you see on Steam, some of the Greenlight games and all the other cool stuff you can get working on here for the price of a console, as well as getting a computer with it too for the same price. So you really get a nice gaming experience here overall for not a lot of money. You do have to get that Windows license, so there is a little bit of an added cost to get the operating system up and running on there, but you can do things like run Linux or SteamOS on here and be able to get yourself online with a free operating system too. But I've been really quite pleased with this and really enjoying just having a machine that you can put together again for the price of a console and get a really good gaming experience with significant performance increases graphically over comparably priced Intel processors. So that is the APU review, at least for the gaming side of things, from AMD, and we're going to be doing more with this, so stay tuned because I know a lot of you want to know about Plex performance and other multimedia playbacks. We're going to cover that in a separate video, and we're also looking at other things too that might be of interest to you, so definitely leave them down below in the comments. We're going to be giving this computer away at some point. So once I'm done with all the reviews on it, we're going to do a giveaway. So definitely stay tuned to the channel, subscribe for sure, and also subscribe to my email list at Lon.TV/email to get on that. And in the meantime, I'm going to play some shoot 'em ups here and maybe start editing sometime before 2 o'clock in the morning. This is Lon Seidman. Thanks for watching. This channel is brought to you by my Patreon supporters. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to Lon.TV/Patreon to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit Lon.TV/S.